Uh, can I see how you would like to do it? It's really up
Okay,
to you.
that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, the recording time has set up already.
No
That's
worries.
why.
No worries.
Okay, so I'll just start it. OK，好，来，各位同学，大家好。你们有可能是在现在现场看到，也有可能是在 YouTube 上面看到我们这个影片哦。那今天这一场呢，是我们唯胜教育跟 Leicester 大学一起合办的讲座。今天我们的整个讲座主题，除了针对 Leicester 大学的介绍之外，还会针对 Leicester 大学最著名的博物馆学来做介绍。那我现在呢，先跟各位分享一下我这边的荧幕画面。我跟各位要介绍的会是包含了今天讲座的整个流程，那还有就是学校这边今天会有哪一些相关的课程介绍跟内容介绍哦。今天的讲座内容其实很丰富，因为我们包含了稍等一下哦。好，今天的讲座内容很丰富，因为我们包含了请到学校的教授，还有我们的校代 c o n y 是我们的教授，还有甜甜是我们的校代，那另外还有 Lina 是我们现在在学的学生，都会分享到现在今年度最及时 Leicester 大学的状况。稍后呢，在荧幕上画面看到的是我们讲座的流程，我们会每一个逐一来做讲解。那对于如果想要申请或是想要咨询的学生啊，可以在看完整个讲座之后再联系我。那在最后一个环节，我会跟各位提到的是，在申请过程中，或者是针对博物馆学已经同学有的哪一些问题，那你们可以做一个记录哦。如果对于各位申请是有帮助的话，或者是有任何不清楚的地方，可以直接联系我。那对各位申请是有帮助的话，也可以在底下留言做一个 feedback。好，我很快速的介绍一下我们维生教育呢，在台湾这边是从2019年开始的，但是其实已经有10多年的时间了。我们最一开始创立是由左上角这一位，他叫做 Richard，是一位雅思的老师。那他本身在 Imperial 大学，还有就是伦敦的 Queen Mary 大学都有开班授课，主要是做雅思老师的培训，所以很多人把他称作雅思之父。那我们现在呢，在我们的总部是在泰国的，那跟 Richard 老师一起。有非常多，有一个蛮庞大的雅思团队哦。那包含我们机构在泰国现在也是整个留学产业的前3大。在全球，我们总共有在5个国家有据点，那在曼谷跟清迈就占了2个。台湾这边呢，目前只是在台北，伦敦也有。所以其实以学生来讲，我们也会有一个跨国的校友会。所以大家如果在不管是出国后或者是出国前，我们会有一些校友的聚会，那让大家来做参加。好，OK，那刚刚有提到，如果有任何问题可以问我们嘛？可以一个比较直接的方式，当然除了到办公室之外哦，另一个大家应该比较熟悉的方式会是用 Instagram，因为像今天活动后的一些花絮剪辑，还有就是未来一些活动相关资讯都会在 Instagram 上面。那如果还不确定自己要不要做咨询的学生呢，可以先在 IG 上面看一下，那直接做提问。那在 IG 上面也会有可以做连接，可以做咨询的连接，可以再请大家做点击。好，那我就先把我们的画面分享交给我们的校代甜甜，他会给各位更多更丰富的资讯。OK，好。So I think I'll let you share the screen.
Yeah. Karen, do you want
Okay,
to?
thank you.
So I will find I've got 2 PowerPoints, so so first of all, to introduce myself and to assure you it doesn't rain all the time here in Britain. It's actually a nice day today. My name is Corinne Fowler. I'm a professor of colonialism and heritage at the School of Museum Studies in the University of Leicester. And I'm here to talk to you today mostly about our MA in Museum Studies, but I also want to mention our other MA, which is an MA in Art Museum and Gallery Studies, in case that also might interest anybody. They're two excellent programs, and there's a lot of collaboration between the tutors on on both programs. So I think it's really worth considering both. So first of all, just to introduce you to the School of Museum Studies, it is a very long established school. It has an amazing reputation, and for good reason. It's the only dedicated place where you can study museum studies in the UK. And it works with all kinds of galleries and museums to develop our teaching and research, to make sure we have great placements for our students, some in small organizations, some in arts organizations, some in the bigger museums, the more established ones. So there's a whole range of choices, not just in terms of the options that you have for teaching and learning, but also your possibilities for placements, which is a kind of unique part of the course, which I'll talk about later. So I just wanted to show you the landing page for anybody who is looking into studying either our museum studies or our arts and gallery studies, which we call AMAGs. So you can see here that there's a lot more detail you can look into on the website. You can get a lot of general information here about museum studies, the kind of research and teaching environment that we have here, the sorts of support we have for students, including English language support from our English language teaching section of the university. And the point of that is to make sure that you have the very best chance that given that if you're studying in another language, it provides an extra challenge for you. So we want to make sure that everybody has the chance to do their best to get a sense of academic English, so that you can have a better experience and an easier experience of reading for your lectures and preparing for your essays, but also writing your essays themselves. We also have a really thriving research environment. We have a big program of research talks and conversations, which you can join in with. And we also have a jobs desk, which is incredibly popular, which shows what kind of jobs are coming up in the sector at the moment. And we've been maintaining that on an ongoing basis for many years. We also have a research centre called the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries, which has an amazing reputation and some very prominent figures. We've got people like Richard Sandell and Suzanne MacLeod, who everyone in the UK who knows anything about museums knows who they are. We also have staff pages, so you can click on individual staff profiles and you can see what we specialise in, not just what we teach, but also the books we're writing, the journal articles we're producing, and the research projects which we are leading. And that covers a whole range of topics, from socially engaged practice in museums to we've got a project that I'm on at the moment called Rural Racism, about the countryside. We have a project based in India by one of our colleagues, Alice Tilche. We've got a lot of research going on, which we really use to inform our teaching, to make sure that when we give lectures, we're talking about current projects and current research activity that's going on, as well as established scholarship in the field. And then I've got a little comparator slide here to show the difference between museum studies and AMAGS, the Music Art Gallery Studies. So museum studies is really thinking about museums in a global context, but not just global museums, but what kind of contexts and changing societies that those museums are operating in. So what do museums have to do to keep themselves relevant, and how do they deal with the current challenges, and how have they dealt with challenges in the past? What function have they served in the past? What function do they serve now? And then we've got really, as I say, research-led teaching, but we also, as well as looking at theory and lots of readings for your lectures and assignments, we also try to give you hands-on experience. So looking at how do you treat museum objects with care? How do you conserve things properly? How do you curate an exhibition? You'll get a chance to curate an exhibition in a team. And we also are very conscious that you're going to want, after this course, to be integrated into the wider world of professional museum people. So we're very well connected in the museums world. The other one that I just wanted to mention, the AMAGS Art Museum and Art Gallery MA, this is focused exclusively on art and art galleries. So we try to really think about what is art, where does art happen, who is producing art, and how do you curate art in a relevant way. So that, just to flag up that we have two MAs. We do have a very well established and hopefully easy to use digital learning environment. So you'll have all of your classes face-to-face. You will see your personal tutors face-to-face. And we have a lot of one-on-one meetings with you to support you through things like dissertation writing, making sure that you're managing fine with the lectures, that you are happy with all of your research techniques when you're looking into topics to write about yourselves. But we also have these other things. So if you miss a lecture, for example, or you want to watch a lecture again because you're not sure exactly what was said in a particular part of it, we have these lectures recorded, and you can look those up again. So it's a really useful way of making sure that you haven't missed anything. We also have lots of collaborative working spaces, so Microsoft Teams, OneNote, and Microsoft Whiteboard, and discussions on our learning platform, which we call Blackboard Ultra. All of your assessment is done digitally as well. So you will upload your essay to on our learning platform, Blackboard, and then you will have it marked online, and you'll receive the mark and the feedback online as well. And you get a chance to look at your tutor's detailed comments and feedback about your essay. And then you also get a chance to follow that up with your personal tutor. So there's lots and lots of support for you to make sure that you progress well through the course, that you understand your feedback, and that you know what to do for the next time. We also have a system where you can find you can do library search, of course. We've got the full catalogue online like any library, but you can also find a free computer. You can look up your timetable online and so on. So lots and lots of things like this. All of your readings, pretty much, other than the ones that you have to go to the library to look at because they're books, our readings are online as well, so you should be able to access most of them, if not all of them, on this Blackboard learning platform as well. I just wanted to say something about the way in which we study, because we don't really have these big hierarchies where, you know, you have to call me Professor Fowler. No, you call me Corinne. We are colleagues. I can learn from you, you can learn from me, and you can learn from each other. So we have a very informal, relaxing kind of environment where we're all working together, talking together about what we're learning, and the people that you're on the course with are going to be a very, very important resource, and often our students are become very close friends, and they cook together, they live near or together with one another. So it's a really lovely sociable environment. We have lots of opportunities for our students, and this is just one of them that we have. So we get a couple of students, including this year, have gone to the amazing Italian Venice Biennale. It's like an amazing art, well, fantasia, like spectacular, in a really beautiful Italian city. And it's like a kind of international field trip with lots of hands-on experience, which is a brilliant opportunity for our students. I just wanted to mention that, because we're always looking out for these kinds of opportunities and scholarships. And then I just wanted to mention our study visits and placements. So as I say, we do try to give you hands-on experience, both in the modules themselves, but also in an 8-week placement it's unpaid, but it's basically a kind of training opportunity where you can go to some really big places like Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which is pictured there. Or, as I say, some of the smaller organisations. There are too many placements for students, so there's lots and lots of opportunity for you to pick and choose what's going to work for you. And then I did just want to mention this, the museums and art galleries, AMAGS modules, because some of them are shared with the other museum studies course. So we've got what's unique to art museums and gallery studies is locating art. We've got a module called that, asking what is art, ways of seeing art and perception, and where art happens, and so on. And then we have another one which is unique to that program called Making Art History, which is approaches to the history of art and producing knowledge about art and how that's changed. We have one which is shared with museum studies, Curating Now, addresses how curators work with artists and museum professionals to produce exhibitions. And that's a brilliant module because you get lots of hands-on experience. Another one that's unique to AMAGS is the Managing Art Collections, which introduces you to issues associated with the care of art collections. And then Museum Studies has a similar focus on looking after artifacts and objects in museums. So I think at some point you actually throw an object down the stairs, but you wrap it up in such a way that it is not going to break. So, you just, it's a really, really fun activity, but really important one. There's one called Design for Creative Lives, which is shared by both courses. So focusing on public engagement, diversity, museum activism, and access. So it's all about how museums can really change society and support an inclusive environment within museums where everyone feels welcome and everyone is shaping decisions inside and outside museums. And then we have one on entering the field, which is focusing on research and development of an exhibition project. And then, of course, the placement, which I mentioned earlier. So I'll stop there. And I think we're wanting, shall I do my sample lecture now as well? We want a sample lecture. So I'm just going to share my screen again, and hang on, I'll try and get it on the right PowerPoint first. Right, here we are. So I'm going to share my screen again because I want to give you a brief sample lecture, one of the lectures that we give towards the beginning of the course. And I've called this Colonial Commercial Networks and Chinese Wallpapers, 1700 to 1857. And the reason for this is that there is, amazingly, lots of Chinese wallpaper in some of our big country houses, which are sometimes called stately homes. I don't know if anyone's ever watched Downton Abbey or anything like that, but these are these big country houses with, you know, many rooms and large grounds with lots of trees and lakes, ornamental lakes and things like this, gardens. And so inside these houses, which often contain museums, there is this wallpaper. So one of the reasons we talk about this is to understand that museum objects and artwork does not just happen in isolation. It's really a product of international encounters between people, and sometimes those encounters are quite violent. And Chinese wallpaper comes into that category. So I thought it would be a really good opportunity to talk to you about that, and also to mention to you that we do have field trips to some of these beautiful country houses, and that you would potentially get an opportunity to see some of this in situ, in situations. So I thought it might interest you. So I want to start off with thinking about something which may be familiar, the English cup of tea. Worth mentioning because, you know, at this point, if I had students with me, I would ask them, what does a British cup of tea mean to you? But it basically is a really interesting just to pause and think about that. I mean, this is something that we often drink, not just in the afternoon, but also, to be honest, all day. In the office, in the morning, we have tea, often from China, sometimes from India, sometimes a bit from India, a bit from China. But we have that with milk, sometimes sugar, and it's a really popular drink. If you go into somebody's house in the UK, they will probably offer you a cup of tea. So this is an interesting way of thinking about Britain's past in particular, and how it intersects with nations like India and nations like China. Because although a cup of tea seems like a really British thing, there's so much more to it than that. In fact, there's very little British about it at all. So the tea itself comes from, well, originally came from China through a kind of a trading company, or a massive corporation, if you like, established in the 17th century, called the East India Company, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the sugar in the tea came from the West Indies, or now known as the Caribbean, through enslaved plantation labor. So, as I say, there's very little to do with coming from Britain. This is really a result of Britain having been an empire and having had colonies where sugar plantations used enslaved labor of African people to produce sugar. And then the East India Company was a very aggressive trading company which fought wars in order to get its Chinese tea. So also you'll notice that it's in a cup which has the willow pattern, which was very popular in Britain, which I'll talk about in a moment. But this cup was very common in Britain, and it's earthenware, which is developed by manufacturers in Staffordshire, which is slightly north of Leicester, in the late 18th century as a British-made version of Chinese blue and white porcelain, which became really, really common in lots of households in Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries. And you can still see that pattern in people's houses today. So the porcelain, of course, was important because when tea is served hot, it was the Chinese skill which enabled cups to be developed, which did not crack and break when the hot liquid was poured into them. And so, again, there are whole museums dedicated to the display of these kinds of items, this kind of porcelain. Okay, so I said I'd talk a little bit more about the willow pattern because I don't know if you can see or know of the story in this willow pattern, which is really developed from a lot of Chinese art, but it's kind of the British interpretation of it. So there are, at the top of that plate, you'll see two lovebirds sort of flying and facing each other. And then if you look a bit below that to the left of them, you'll see an island and a boat going across. And then if you look a little bit further forward, you'll see a tea house. And to the left of that, there is a couple going across a bridge a bit further down near the sort of bottom of the main circle. And the story that many British people know is that the two lovebirds were a princess and somebody that she fell in love with and ran away, and there they are going over the bridge, and they're being chased by the king's soldier who's trying to stop them from being together. So it's a kind of tragic, it's a love story, but it's a kind of tragic story. Now, one of the things which I always mention in this lecture is just thinking about the history behind this Chinese wallpaper and some of the Chinese objects that you see in these big country houses in Britain, in those museums, which many, many people go and visit today. What's behind it is a company which was established in 1600, which is the East India Company. And it was first known as the English East India Company. And it was founded in, as I say, the early 17th century. And it got a royal charter, so permission to trade from our Queen Elizabeth I. And then initially through negotiation, this trading company, the East India Company, which I've called it IEC for short, got permission from local rulers to establish factories, which were essentially trading stations with forts to defend those trading interests. And the reason why this company wanted to trade in the first place was that Europeans were gradually realizing that there were many things in China and India and the kind of what they called the Far East as well, which were of real value to the English consumer. The English people wanted to have tea, they wanted to have Chinese objects and Indian cotton and so on. Indian exotic woods to make furniture, these sorts of things. And of course, Chinese wallpaper was all part of that. But then so were drugs like opium, which I'll come back to in a moment. So although initially the East India Company was quite small and it was a group of merchants and traders, they gradually became bigger and bigger and bigger, and they started to control initially parts of India. They started building forts where they could defend themselves militarily. They got these massive private armies to defend themselves, their trading interests, and eventually to conquer different parts of India. So they started conquering local rulers. And this eventually all connected with China. But in India, the East India Company had a massive victory called the Battle of Plassey in 1757. And that actually allowed them to collect tax from local people and from local businesses, which of course made them fabulously rich. Also, one of the, as I've mentioned, one of the big demands from the European consumers and the European markets was tea from China. And so the East India Company started trading with China. But the issue was that the Chinese had things that British people wanted in the 18th century, but British people didn't have anything that Chinese people wanted. So it left the East India Company with a bit of a problem. You know, what could they needed to buy? They needed silver coins to buy the Chinese tea, but the Chinese didn't want to buy anything that we had. So what they started doing was making opium in India and then selling it in China because opium was wanted. But the problem is that obviously opium is not a very healthy thing for people to be smoking. And soon there was an addiction, a kind of epidemic of opium addiction in China. And the Chinese emperors very responsibly wanted to stop this trade in opium. So they made it illegal to sell opium in China. But of course, the British by then were so addicted to their tea that they insisted on fighting wars with China. At first, they smuggled the opium illegally, but eventually they fought 2 wars with China and forced them to China to make them continue trading in opium so they could continue getting silver coins to buy the tea to take back from China to Britain. And so a very popular trading route was that a ship would leave belonging to the East India Company, that it would leave England. First, it would go to India. It would pick up the opium and other things, and then it would sail to China and sell the opium in China and then come back to Britain with the tea. So that's why they had these enormous ships that were big enough to hold all those tea leaves. Eventually, back in India, Britain, the East India Company, they'd taken over most of India through military control, and they were more or less ruling it directly. But because they had angered the Indian people through terrible, atrocities, battles, aggression, transferring Indian wealth back to Britain, the British government took over direct control of India, and India became a colony after 1858. So yeah, I just thought you might find this illustration from the 18th century very interesting. This is an Indian miniature painting of an English man taking opium, smoking opium with his Indian servants around him. So back in London, this was the headquarters of the East India Company, which by then was the biggest corporation that the world had ever seen. And they were responsible for about a third of the world's trade. And this was the headquarters. And that's where the board of directors sat. They made certain decisions about East India Company activity in India and China and many other countries too. But they didn't really police the decisions that were being made because they couldn't really control everything that was going on. There was so much activity. There were so many soldiers serving the East India Company, so many traders. It was a massive, massive organization by that point. However, there was a lot of money to be made by investing and trading with the East India Company. So here is one of the British country houses that I mentioned earlier. This one is near London, and it belonged to the director of the East India Company called Joseph Childs. And all of his family at some point were involved with the East India Company, and they all had nice houses like this one. This one is called Osterley Park, and it contains many museum objects, many Chinese objects, and there are many more houses like this that I could show you, but just to show where the profits were going and how much money could be made through this company. And of course, the East India Company being an early example of a joint stock company meant that people would invest money in it and make profits from it just through investing their money in the company without any direct involvement with the company at all. So in one of the country houses quite close to the University of Leicester, there are incredible objects, and this one I thought might be of interest because it's a Chinese silk bed curtain, which is the kind of luxury item which shows so much skill by the people who made it. This would have been made in a Chinese village, and it has all kinds of scenes embroidered onto it. You can sort of see a tent there. You can see people seated there with, there are horses, military figures. There's a lot to see in it. There are trees, there are flowers. And it is a very beautiful thing to look at. And this was used as a bed hanging, although it was never really taken out of its box. It was a gift for the king and queen at the time. But I think it was this kind of item which really drove the East India Company to do its trading so that people could have these beautiful things from China, which was seen as the kind of home of everything sophisticated at the time. You can see that these things there are very richly embroidered with gold thread, and there are also peacocks and peacock feathers depicted there. And it's a very, very high quality silk bed hanging, but because of the demand for these sorts of things, there were lots of specialist workshops which manufactured luxury items like this for the European luxury market, for people who had money to pay. I just wanted to talk to you about, a specific example of opium trading, which comes quite surprisingly into English history, because we have probably one of our most famous romantic poets was called William Wordsworth, and you can see a painting of him there on the right-hand side of the picture. And I just wanted to talk about him because it sort of shows you how even the most remote villages in England had something to do with China and with the East India Company. So William Wordsworth wrote a very famous poem called I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, which is better known as the Daffodils poem. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of that poem, but it sort of starts, I wandered lonely as a cloud, and it talks about this field of daffodils that he sees, and it's probably the most famous poem in the English language. And in the main picture there, you can see lots of tourists visiting the museum of the Wordsworth family, and that white cottage is called Dove Cottage, and it's the cottage where the Wordsworth family used to live. You can go inside it today and you can look at the rooms as pretty much as they were at the time when they lived there. It's quite a small cottage. And it's in an area which I recommend you go to visit if you come to the UK, called the Lake District. It's very, very beautiful. So William Wordsworth had a brother called John Wordsworth, and John Wordsworth wanted to help his brother to have enough money to not have to work so that he could write his poems and do what he really loved in life. So he said to his brother William Wordsworth, I'm going to become an East India Company captain, and I will make enough money for you to be able to stop work and pay the bills and the rent for our cottage and everything, just by the profits that I bring back from India and China. And so sure enough, John Wordsworth, in the sort of early 19th century, it was just at the turn of a century, became an East India Company captain. And he wrote a letter to his uncle saying that he would have a chance of making money by opium trading. And what he was hoping was that he would make so much money. He said, I'll become as rich as a dog. So I'll make so much money that I'll bring it back to you, and you can write your poems. I will retire, and your sister will be properly provided for, and you won't have any financial burdens ever again. So although it was quite a loving idea, there's a lot of violence and illegal trading behind the East India Company, which is not so pretty a story. Oh, on the right-hand side of the slide there, you can see I've got an example of an ivory opium pipe. So the ivory would have been collected in India, and then the pipe would have been smoked in England, but these kind of pipes were smoked in China as well. So the problem with opium addiction didn't just happen in China, it happened in the UK as well, because you could buy opium over the counter in the chemist, as it was a laudanum which people used to take if they got a headache or if they were feeling ill. So they would basically get addicted to opiates, just like the Chinese were getting addicted. And there in that white cottage, the person who lived in it after the Wordsworth family was actually an opium addict. And he wrote a very famous book called Confessions of an English Opium Eater, which is by someone called Thomas de Quincey. Anyway, I did mention that the opium came from India initially. So opium was grown in India in these opium factories in the 1800s. And then it was processed there, but then sold, transported in these East India Company ships and sold in China. And I wanted to give a sort of an idea, a flavor of what those opium factories were like, because they were really horrible. And there's a brilliant novel which is very well researched by an Indian writer called Amitav Ghosh, called The Sea of Poppies. And some of his depictions of opium factories are in fact very accurate indeed. So you can see some images there on the right-hand side of some opium factories. But he described it as having an earthy, sickly odor of raw opium sap which hung close to the ground like wood smoke on a chilly day. The air was hot and fetid with a reek so powerful that and this is the protagonist, the main character in the novel, Diti, had to pinch her nose and keep herself from gagging. There were bare-bodied men sunk waist deep in tanks of opium, tramping around and round to soften the sludge. Their eyes were vacant, glazed, and yet somehow they managed to keep moving as slow as ants in honey, tramping, treading. So you can see these were pretty horrible places to work and very exploitative indeed. So the problem was not just opium addiction in England and in China, but also, this was really unethical because of the way in which the opium was produced and the horrible conditions that people in the factory had to work in. So I thought I'd show you an example of some of this Chinese wallpaper. This is actually in a country house in Wales, which is to the west of England, and it's called Penrhyn Castle. And interestingly enough, this wallpaper was paid for with the profits of slavery plantations in the West Indies. So another big British Empire story. But that wallpaper was painted in workshops in China, especially for the English market. And then it was brought over with the East India Company ships and then very carefully installed on the walls of that house. And I suppose you can call this a good example of Chinese decorative art, but it was not art for the Chinese consumer, but for British consumers. And very wealthy people, because this was hand painted, only wealthy people could afford it. Very wealthy people would buy this for their country houses, and they tended to put it in their bedrooms or in the rooms where the women sat to drink the tea. And looking at this bedroom, you can see that there are many other objects from the Far East in this room. You can see the vases, the things on the bed table, and there is what was known as a Japan cabinet, or a lacquered ornate cabinet, which is to the right of the bed. This is a bit of a close-up of some of this Chinese wallpaper. The Chinese wallpaper was it was full of symbolism, but I think a lot of that symbolism was lost in translation. So the cockerel there and the chicks were symbols of prosperity, for example, and there were flowers which meant different things, like lilies. There's a white lily there. But the British were kind of interested in its symbolism, but I don't know how far they understood it, and also how far it was adapted for the British taste. This is another example of Chinese things in one of our country houses, because as I say, these country houses are like museums as well, and they have lots of pieces of furniture that people can come and see. So this is an example of a private dressing room or a closet at Ham House in near London, and it was decorated with these imitation lacquer chairs and this a lacquer table, which is where the tea was put on. This was from Java or possibly Vietnam, they're not sure. And then on the table, you've got a Chinese porcelain teapot with silver gilt mounts. So we got lots of things like this in these houses. And I just wanted to also mention that some of the gardens are themselves a kind of museum, which testifies to this very old connection of trade between the Far East and Britain, and using the East India Company. So this is just one example of many gardens which are referencing the Far East through ornate buildings and bridges, and there's certain plants which were brought from China and Japan to go around these gardens. So landscape design around these country estates was also often referencing this very old connection internationally. And then I just wanted to finish by talking about what you can get today. So you can still buy in Britain Chinese style wallpaper. So this is called Chinese garden ochre wallpaper, and it's £120 a roll, which I'm hoping that if this goes onto a YouTube video, that the price might be translated so you can see how expensive that is. But it's this wallpaper that you can buy today is based on a 17th century Chinese style wallpaper, which was designed by actually a French designer for the European market for the kind of Chinese style wallpaper that people really liked. And I thought it would also be interesting to mention one other legacy, which is that there is still a company called the East India Company. It's a different company than the original one, but it's referencing that East India Company history, and it sells things like tea. So you can see that on the left there's a tin of white tea, and on the right there's another type of tea there. But what this company never does is ever mention the violent history that is behind these kinds of original enterprises. So I will stop there and pass on to back to you.
Yes. Okay. Corinne, thank you so much. I enjoyed a lot, and yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. I'm so lucky that I don't even need to pay tuition fee, and then I could have this taster lecture. Okay, so I think the next session will be our student sharing, or is there anything Tian wish to add information about, or no?
Good, we can move on to the students.
Okay, right. So I think I'll let Lena take over it.
Okay, I can go first. So about sorry. I should
no problem.
cut in.
Yeah, feel free if you need to share the screen.
No, I just prepare some of the short experience sharing things. I don't prepare any PowerPoint, so sorry for
no
that.
problem at all.
But for my learning experience at the museum study was great. In terms of courses design, they include most of the knowledge that I will be used in the museum. And there are also many subjects that I learning for the first time, but their learning support, as the Tian mentioned it, their learning support is very good, and they're ensure that students understand the assignment requirement before writing each assignment, and they're giving you opportunity to ask questions. So museum study is a word as a Taiwanese, so we don't have that kind of graduate school. Maybe we have, but I don't know. But for people, it's not that familiar subject. But if you're really interested in this field and you're willing to apply for this department in University of Leicester, then don't worry about your homework because they'll fully support you. So you got a lot of support for that and learn a lot. And however, I have to say the museum a very bold field. So before I back to campus, I get into the work first. Desire to take some systematic training. So I'm seeking this opportunity in the UK. So that's why I joined I'm joined the museum studies family. And so sorry, I'm just a bit far away, but museum was very bold field. So their courses are more like establishing the basic understanding for me and giving me a systematic concept. And that's certainly what I want. But therefore, I'm highly recommended that if you start your courses, you may need to start thinking about which aspect or which part of the museum fields that are interested in. Because after all of the courses, there is a module called specialism. So when you're if you're still thinking what kind of part that you're interested in museum field, you can do more further study in the specialism module, and that will really helpful in the final module of the, so we call the practical, and basically it's an internship. So in the UK we call internship work placement. That's also what I learned. Yeah, and about that module, that's my favorite part, because in that module in which you have to intern in an art institution, from through that process, from looking for a placement that suit me to actually being placed, I think it's very consistent with the job search experience. So if you want to connect to the world, it's a perfect module for the student who want to work in the museum or art gallery. And also that was a module only for 2 months, like fully 8 weeks. I do use what I learned during my courses and apply it to the real exhibition project. So I feel like I really got what I want in the UK, because one of the reasons why I want to study here is that I hope to receive the systematic training and also connect to the museum world. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. They'll be so useful for Taiwanese students, especially. So I see another student, Yating, has joined us now. So hi, Yating. Hello, Yating. Could you hear me? I think you're now muted.
Hello, could everyone hear me? Sorry.
Hi, hello. I'm glad you make it.
Yeah, I'm in a convenience store, so it will be a bit noisy. Sorry for that. Yeah.
No problem. So I think Tan will share the screen for you, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, no
yeah.
problem.
Today I'm gonna share with you guys about the experience that I study in the museum studies. So I will divide my presentation into 3 parts, and I'm going to start with the process of choosing University of Leicester. So firstly, as you know, museum studies at Leicester has played a leading role in the reinvention of museum theory and practice. So we have been the locus of creative and critical researchers and practitioners who have transformed the academic field and professional practice. And on this slide, I showed a museum roadmap. So there are 8 modules in 1 year, and through this course, you will get an in-depth understanding of museums and
I think
sorry.
There's some internet problem, right?
Yeah, it
yes,
is.
it's okay now, no problem.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the school will take us to like maybe 6 or 8 museums per year to have the museum visit. And so in this kind of experience, I explore lots of working environments and organizations within the museum and gallery sector. It's really helpful, because it will influence my decision about choosing my intern in the museums. And also, I take some example. I've been to the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, the Natural History Museum in London, and People's History Museum in Manchester. So this study visit provide numerous opportunities to meet a wide range of people. And in addition, the school also provides a platform for many employment opportunity. I show the links here. The website about Museum Studies Connect provide volunteering, job stacks, careers, and employability for our students to apply. And even you are not familiar with those museums and galleries, so you
Well, yes, I think Yatin is now in the convenience store, as you mentioned. So that's probably why the internet problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, and I'm gonna talk about the next slide about the intern. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I complete an 8-week and full-time work placement. Your selection about this, it will host is supported by the marketplace, which like representatives of a number of museum visits to promote their museums. And also the schedule starts in November and runs until September next year. And the school will provide the CV and cover letter section before you apply for the summer intern. And on February, you will have a chance to talk to 3 to 4 museum representatives, and you can let you are interested in. So to know the more detail about your position, it's really helpful to choose the suitable place for you. And on March, I started to apply for 1 museum for my summer intern. And like, fortunately, I got the Saatchi Gallery intern about the education department. So if you Okay, and interviews are held from March to May, and the school also offers the interview workshops to practice. In my experience, I've not only joined the museum studies workshop, I also asked for the employment center help in our schools. So I think both ways is really like helpful for you to apply the placement. And I combine my experience I work in Taiwan and the research skill that I learned from the museum studies. So, yeah. Finally, I would like to share with you some additional experience. So it's next slide. Yeah. And the first I applied for my volunteer, it's in the Edinburgh Art Center because I'm really interested in contemporary art. And volunteer here is I could know more about the artists and the experience that what happened in the gallery, and also it influenced. That's why I choose the Saatchi Gallery about contemporary art as well. And providing some information to the public, you can learn how to guide the gallery's artwork, and also there are some variety activities in the gallery, so you can have an opportunity to get a practical experience there. And the other one, it's another museum, for example, that you can apply, like Leicester Museum and Art Gallery, King Richard III Visit Center, and so on. So the last one is about the we work with the National Space Center to use the collections and plan some exhibitions in the school. And through these courses, I learned how to write a full proposal. Also, you have to provide the really clear project to curate the exhibitions. It's really useful if you want to curate the exhibitions in the real world. And that is what I learned over this year. I hope it helps you to understand the museum studies, which is related to your future career. And I put my emails there. If you have any questions, just feel free to email me. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice of you to provide the email for them.
Okay.
So I think let's move on to the QA session, the final session of the webinar. So I've actually got 12 questions from our students, but most of them has covered in the webinar and the sharing we just conducted. So I'll pick some of them and let's go through it, and I'll try to finish it in 10 minutes, okay? All right, so for the first questions is a student checking her background if she is eligible for this program. She's currently working in the gallery and event management area for almost a year, and she was majored in history. And she's wondering if she's eligible and a bit concerned if she was lacking of relevant working experience, and if that is okay for her to apply.
No, I mean, I think she sounds great. Actually, it's our course is very interdisciplinary. It draws from lots of different academic disciplines and topics, so and methodologies. So it's absolutely fine. Many of our students do come from history and things like English, so it's not a problem. It's an asset, I'm sure, and also any kind of experience, such as the one she was describing, it would be an excellent background for courses like this. So yeah, she shouldn't worry.
Good news. Okay, so for the second question is related to placement. Is placement paid one, and how should I apply for it? Would it be matched by the university, and normally how long is it?
So it's an 8-week placement, and it is managed by the university. It's not a paid placement. It's a work and training experience placement. So it really gives our students a chance to move from sort of theory and reading about museums to actually having a placement inside of one and seeing how it works and what the various institutional cultures and museums are like in the UK. So it's a unique opportunity. And as I said, we've got many options for placements. So we have more people who want to give our students placements than we have students. So students can apply to do the placements. We try to make it as much like a job application as possible, because it really helps our students to get a sense of how to do their CV, how to do an interview, but we do it in as supportive a way as possible.
Okay, thank you. And let's move on to the next one. It's regarding accommodation. Is accommodation guaranteed, and is pre-sessional class provide limited places?
Okay, I'll take this one. So accommodation normally is guaranteed for all first-year students. So if they apply before September 1st, and it's on a first-come, first-served basis. So I would suggest students, if they already have an offer, they should apply first so that they get the choice that they want, and so they're not leaving everything to the last minute where all the other rooms, all the better rooms, I would say, are full. So yeah, it's on a first-come, first-serve. It's guaranteed, given given that you apply before September 1st. You can still apply after that, but it'll really depend on whether we have any spaces left. All right. And for pre-sessional, there is no cap. I don't believe there's a cap, but it greatly depends on the students' IELTS scores. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Tian. And next question is about alumni group. So could student benefit by alumni group when they try to find a job, and is there a routine reunion for alumni?
I'll take this again. So yeah, we recently established an alumni chapter for Taiwan specifically. So they do routinely kind of organize sessions for everyone to kind of catch up. It does help because we do have a lot with careers as well. If you're specifically looking for some within Taiwan, especially just because we do have a lot of museum studies alumni and they are working in some prominent museums or galleries within Taiwan as well. So it would definitely be a great networking opportunity if once you come back to Taiwan and kind of join these sessions. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the last two questions, and next one is about a field trip. Is field trip still limited place, and does it need extra cost, or is it included in tuition fee?
Oh, that's a great question. It is included, and we have lots of amazing field trips. Yeah, so we take students to all kinds of art galleries and museums across the country. And I recently took a group to Kedleston Hall, which was a big stately home in Derbyshire, which used to belong to the someone called Nathaniel Curzon, the Viceroy of India. So we looked at an art exhibition there in response to the Indian history of the house. The students went around the grounds, went around the house, went around a museum attached to the house, which is known as the Eastern Museum, full of objects from all over the world, but mostly India, China and Japan and so on. And we discussed, we had a room set aside where we discussed what we'd seen and had a kind of class inside the country house. So it was a really beautiful day, actually. And I have to say that there's also a tea room where you could have traditional scone, jam, cream.
Oh, nice.
And a cup of tea.
Lovely. Oh, that's really nice because
and the places are not limited.
Yeah.
Everyone goes on their field trip.
Oh, that's even better. That's really unique because I think most of the field trip is limited and need extra cost. So it's amazing. Yeah, it's nice. Okay, so the last questions regarding dissertation. So he say I've no experience in no research experience, but I've heard that this program is quite academic based and research based. So I have huge concern. I'm not able to pass the dissertation. Is dissertation required, or could I do the internship instead of dissertation?
Oh, okay. That's a new question. That's a very new question. So, the students that we accept on the course, we have a special requirement to make sure that we don't have any student with a grade point average that wouldn't really be enough to do a course like this. So any of the students that we accept on our course, we're fairly confident that they have the right academic background to do the course. So it's quite common for students to worry about doing dissertations because it's a longer piece of work. It's not hugely long, but it just causes students to be a bit anxious. So what we do is we allocate somebody with a special tutor to really help them through that process from beginning to the middle to the end. So they're not alone in doing this piece of work. They have meetings regularly with their dissertation tutor, and they get to discuss what they're going to research, how they're shaping their topic, what they need to read, how they're going to structure their chapters, how they're going to organize their argument, and what the things are that they've discovered in the course of their research. And if they're doing interviews with people in museums or something like that, then we help them through the ethical application process to make sure that they conduct their research ethically. And we also talk to them about their interview design or their research design and their research methodologies. So they're absolutely not alone in any way and shouldn't worry, although it is quite common for people to worry about them, they would be very well supported.
Yeah. Thank you, Corinne. I think for this student, no need to worry too much. Of course, I understand he'll be anxious before apply, but there's a lot of support the university provide. So just if you need help or any assistance, just ask, and there'll be definitely a lot of support. So I've got some questions left, but most of the answer has been covered during the webinar. So I think they'll be the end of this webinar. And for the student, maybe now is watching our videos on YouTube. So, or our videos on the our own platform later on. If you need anything, if you got any questions, you could send direct to me and I will ask no matter Corinne or Tian and to help you out. Okay, so thank you guys. Thank you so much. And wish you have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tian. Bye bye.